Hello, you all. Thank you all for tuning in to another episode of Better Black News. On this particular episode, we're going to be talking about politics, everything about voting and just understanding it, because sometimes it can get confusing. I know for me personally, it's confusing sometimes on the state level, national level, some state questions. Sometimes I just don't get how it's worded. Just all of it seems confusing sometimes, and I feel like that's what causes people to not want to participate, because it's just too much. So I wanted us to break it down and get it in layman's terms for us. And today we're joined by Bailey Perkins, who teaches American governance and works in public policy. Bailey, how are you, girl?
I am wonderful. Thank you so much, Jillian, for this invitation.
I'm excited. I'm so happy that you decided to join us. Thank you for, being adjustable with all this going on, the Zoom thing. I want us to be in person, but it's fine. We're working it out.
Yes, that's what Black women do. We work it out, so I'm excited.
That's right. Okay, so let's get right into it. I want to know if there's really a difference between national and state level on voting, because I always hear people say, well, if you're not going to vote, at least vote in your state elections, because that's the ones that really matter, because that's where you live. Is that really true? Is one more important than the other?
Well, all elections are important, but the more local you get, the closer you are to the people and the closer you are to the issue. And so it feels more important the more local you get, but all of it matters. And so I'm going to bring up a slide. Let me go back. So that really illustrates the point of why your vote matters. We talk about often, first and foremost, that our ancestors and community leaders put their literal blood, sweat, and tears on the lines for us to have this opportunity to vote and participate in elections at all levels. So for one, that's definitely a reason why we should always participate in every election that we're eligible for. But beyond that, it affects us in a real way. You have the opportunity to influence policy when you vote. The best example is in the state of Arkansas, Arkansans will see an increase in their minimum wage from $8.50 an hour back in 2018 to $11 an hour in 2021. And why did that happen? Because Arkansans took the initiative to put a petition on the ballot, and Arkansans showed up to vote, and they voted to make that happen. Wow. So Arkansans are going to have a more equitable wage because people decided to show up to vote. In Anchorage, Alaska, there was a proposition where they were voting for road improvements in their city. Nearly 44,000 people voted in that election, but the measure passed by just shy of 300 votes.
Oh, wow.
So if those folks didn't show up to the polls that day, then there wouldn't be extra monies allocated for their road improvement. In the third picture, you see Julia Mayhouse, and she won a seat on the Boston City Council. Boston's one of the largest cities in the United States. And she wouldn't have had that opportunity to serve in the city if people didn't show up to vote. She won her election by literally one vote. So if two people decided who supported her to stay at home that day or to do whatever and miss the election, Boston would have someone else in that seat. And wow. So our elections are just that critical, and sometimes they're decided just by those who show up. And so decisions are going to happen whether we show up or not. Why not be a part of the process and help to influence things in the way that they should be, because all of these things affect our lives. So right. I would argue that yes, the presidential election is important, but so is that school board race. So is that local election on that proposition or on that state question. All of it is important, and people should show up to make sure that they can help be a part of shaping policy, which then affects us for generations to come.
Okay. Okay. So let me say this, or ask this, I should say. I've heard this plenty of times, especially during the last presidential election, and especially the one that's coming up now. I've always heard about the electoral college, electoral college this or whatever. Is it really true that the electoral college chooses for that state or for that region or whatever? If they do, what's the point of people voting? Like, that's just discouraging. Like, what's the point if they've already counted my vote already, if that makes sense?
So you raise an important question that's a common discussion during election season and a common discussion among political science circles. There is a misunderstanding, though, about the Electoral College. It's not just we're electing these people who then decide who the president is. It's almost like, see if I can get the second slide. There we go. So it's almost like when organizations select delegates when they go to conferences to vote on behalf of their affiliates or chapters, right?
Okay.
So it's those 10 or 12 people who represent the organization's interest in making that decision, right? The same thing can be applied to the Electoral College. So what happens is that the Electoral College is based on how many congressional districts are in your state. So the goal is, when the founders drafted this form of voting, they did it to make sure that the smaller states wouldn't be left out. Without the Electoral College, people would just go to Florida, California, New York, Texas, Illinois, Pennsylvania, and call it a day. Because sometimes the population, when you add the population of many of those larger states, the population makes up probably about a third of the country, right? And so a lot of the smaller states would be left out without having that balanced representation through the Electoral College system. And so we have electors based on how many members of Congress that we have. And so I want to take us to one important point about the census. So the census is important because that's how we decide how many members of the Electoral College that we'll get. They use the census as a way to count how many people live in that state. So the federal government is able to allocate funds for an entire decade for our state, but also decides our representation. So if Oklahoma had a larger and a stronger census count over time, since our state is growing and more people are living here, we could potentially have more members of Congress, so more congressional districts, and we could have more electors, which would allow us to have more of a say in the presidential election.
I was going to say, that just made me think of something. So if that's the case, then that really reiterates to your point on why it's important we vote who's in office locally, because they in a way decide who our president is. So if you know what they value, I guess you'll kind of know what kind of president they'll be voting for. I guess if that makes sense. So I never even
our electors are a little bit different. So our electors are, since we have 7 congressional districts, we have 2 senators and 5 members of Congress, we have 7 electors. So there's 7 Democratic electors who are picked by the party and 7 Republican electors who are picked by the party. And so basically when it's time to vote in November, whichever candidate wins at the polls, those 7 electors are chosen to represent that state to go vote on behalf of Oklahoma. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So
yes.
In a way, we are voting for the electors, but it's not just random people who go pick a candidate who they choose. We're picking our electors based on which candidate wins on election day. So it's a winner-take-all system. So it's a typical discussion in political science, trying to think through what's the best way of building representation, to make sure that the voices of folks who live in Oklahoma or Wyoming or other states with smaller populations can still have a say in the election process, but also making sure that people feel like their voices count. So it's a balance.
Okay. My next question is about state questions. Now, this particular one, I know annoys me sometimes when I go vote for state questions. Why are they worded the way they are when it's regular citizens that's not in political science, that's just regular people that have regular jobs, that understand regular English, and they word it in a way that's really confusing? I know you probably can't really answer like why, because you don't make the rules, but is there a way that we can help the voter not be confused on what it says? Because I'm like, what does this say? Like, I know people, I'm not going to call them out, but people that I know personally just go mark answers because, one, they don't want to not vote because of our ancestors and everything. But I'm like, I don't want you to just vote for something just because you wanted to vote, but you don't know what you're voting for, so you're just marking an answer. So it's like, I don't know, it's stressful. So how can we like fix this?
So that's a great question. And you're right. The way that our state questions are written are in very technical language. And it's to make sure that it's written in a way that can be placed into our city ordinances or our state statutes or the state constitution, and in a way that ensures that it does the exact thing of what it says it's going to do. Because if it's too simplified, there could be loopholes, or if it's too simplified, it could miss something. And so that technical legal language ensures that it does the thing that it's supposed to do. To your point, everyday folks don't have a law degree, right? I don't have a law degree. And so it's important for folks who care, who want to participate in our system, to use the resources out there, because there are a lot of organizations who have brilliant people who are great at taking these complicated state questions and breaking them down into layman's terms. And so my first recommendation to folks is making sure that everyone is signed up for absentee ballots. What I love about absentee ballots is that you can sign up for them at the beginning of every calendar year, or anytime actually during the year. But I suggest at the beginning of every calendar year, because you get ballots for every single election you're eligible to participate in within that calendar year. And so when you sign up for, so that's a great thing.
So
absolutely.
You write that down.
Yes, yes. And you can get it from elections.ok.gov. So you go there and there's a link you can click where you can say sign up for absentee ballots, because recently Oklahoma made the decision to allow people to apply for absentee ballots online. So it's at the click of a button, you can sign up and you'll get that ballot at least a month in advance. Wow. What I love about it is, because I'm the traditional type of person where I like to go on election day and go get my sticker and cast my ballot and everything. And so I'll use that ballot that they send me as a cheat sheet. So I now have all of the language that's going to be on that ballot, and it gives me time to do my research and ask questions and all of that. And it notifies me, hey, Bailey, there's an election coming up that you can participate in.
Wow.
So that's my first piece of advice. I'm also going to share.
I did not know that. Wow.
This list of resources as well. For those who care about state questions, as I mentioned, elections.ok.gov is the place where they can get detailed information on when the elections are going to happen, what questions are going to be there, what exactly you're going to be voting on. I definitely encourage folks to find a local news source that they trust. So like the Oklahoman will typically have a breakdown in one of their papers of the language of the state question broken down in simplified language. Non-Doc is another great local paper that follows what's going on in state government. The Frontier is another one that may post great information. And the Oklahoma Policy Institute is a great resource, okpolicy.org. And they have breakdowns of all of the state questions in simplified terms. They don't take positions on those. They'll just give information to the public about what exactly does this say in layman's terms in a way that I can understand before I go to vote.
Okay.
If people want to understand what's going on at the federal level, congress.gov is the place where all of the bills that Congress is drafting or working on are stored at that site. And you could even track where that bill is in the process and any actions taken on it. One of my favorite resources is the National Council on State Legislatures. They're a national organization that's really breaking down issues, because a lot of the times our state questions deal with long-standing issues, whether it's about voting or healthcare or education funding, whatever it is. They have really great reports that break down some of the background on whatever issue it may be that you're voting on. So that's a great resource too. But I also encourage those who are tuning in to find that organization that covers the issue that you care about. So if it's something related to food security, for example, Feeding America is a national network that has over 200 food banks across the nation in it. And they have a lot of great information about issues of food security, that and the Food Research and Action Center. So if you care about like how do we feed people in Oklahoma and other issues related to food security, they would be a great resource on that. If you care about healthcare issues, there's lots of health specific organizations that follow all things healthcare, right? And they can give you breakdowns on what some of the ballot measures mean or what some of the issues mean in layman's terms. Because policy can be complicated, but it doesn't have to be complicated. And there are people who are working round the clock to make sure that people can get factual and digestible information to understand when it's time to vote.
Okay. For my next question, I have a slide I want to show on the screen. So it is 2020, and we are still dealing with machines miscalculating. And so this is frustrating because it's 2020. So can you elaborate on what's up with that? Why is that even a thing still possible today? I mean, it's 2020. I don't get it.
Sure. So every state has different ways of handling how they administer elections. One of the great things about Oklahoma is we are known across the country for having one of the most secure voting systems. We still rely on the physical machine voting, where you can fill out that paper ballot and you slip it into the machine and it counts it on the spot. And then we have staff who, after that election, can go back and count those ballots by hand to make sure that there's accurate counts, or if there's something close in a race, we're able to have that paper trail to make sure that, things are done in a proper way. So usually those stories of issues at the ballot box and the machines not working rarely happens in Oklahoma. But just like anything, when you are dealing with technology, you have a strong likelihood to have things that malfunction sometimes. But the great thing is that's where our voices come in as engaged citizens. So when those moments do happen, you have people who are paying attention and holding our election leaders, because we have a secretary in Oklahoma who oversees election, making sure we're holding that person accountable to make sure that those elections are fair, to make sure that they're following all the protocols, to make sure that ballots are protected and counted accurately. And so there are a lot of human errors that happen sometimes, but it's up to us as engaged citizens to make sure that we're holding them accountable to rectifying issues and ensuring the safeguards of our election system.
Okay. If people want to get in contact with you and they have further questions, or if they want to email you and be like, hey, you said this on the interview, I have, questions about that, how can they get in contact with you?
Absolutely. So I am on Twitter at Bailey M. Perkins. I'm also on LinkedIn. Definitely can reach out to me and send me a message there, or if you have an email and you want to contact me there, BaileyMariePerkins@gmail.com.
Okay, beautiful. All right, well, I'm so appreciative. Again, thank you again for joining us, being so transparent and breaking things down. I feel like I'm more educated and more clear on this stuff, because it just gets too cumbersome sometimes. You're like, what is happening? What is going on? So I appreciate you taking the time out to speak with us and our Better Black News audience. So that's it, people. You heard it here first. I'm Jillian Whitaker, reporting for Better Black News, reminding you to be better, and of course, during this time, to be safe and sanitary, and please keep your social distance.